Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tobias Martens from Germany, and Germany is not famous for making good jokes, but considering what the topic of this conference is, actually we're talking a lot about bias. It's a funny coincidence that two biases standing in front of you today speak about human language and artificial intelligence. My background is sociology as well as political science, so today I'm going to cover a couple of topics in regards to artificial intelligence that are maybe a little bit outside of the classical technical domains, but the more I would be happy to engage with you in discussions afterwards and to work together with you in regards to make different AIs talk to each other towards a universal language in artificial intelligence. It's no secret that by 2025, and there's various researchers out there, that voice interfaces will become the predominant user interface. Businesses will interact by human language with their consumers. Every button will be basically replaced by AI-based conversational interfaces. So there's a huge paradigm shift going on at the moment. It's the new normal that people talk to machines, and there's a lot of discussions going on at the moment in the NLP domain. Whether it's be like how polite should AI interfaces talk with their consumers, what kind of personas should they have. O'Reilly has like own titles on in regards to designing for voice interfaces, but nevertheless we notice as well that many voice interfaces still lack functionalities that goes beyond setting like an alarm timer. So we see a lot of discussions in the space, as well as we can consider there's a huge discussion in regards to privacy aspects. What kind of information should AI companies be allowed to mine from your voice? And we see like breakthroughs like Neuralink, for instance, where we're discussing in how far AI interfaces inside of the human brain can actually be used in order to optimize language processing. But we believe it's a little bit more complicated. And for the first part of this presentation, I would like to talk about bias in natural language processing. What the situation is today, basically, is that every AI understands human language in a slightly different way. This is a simple picture. We see here a user that wants to, that says, "Hey AI, I'm hungry, call me a pizza." And what happens nowadays is basically that all different voice AIs will interpret this spoken command of a user in a slightly different way. And you have maybe like the Google that recognize really like the intent of the command, but then you have like third-party AIs like Nuance or Bosch that are rather confused by it. So we have a problem that AIs are basically only niche intelligent. They only understand a certain number of use cases. If we go a little bit further and consider what's going on in the hardware manufacturing market, OEMs, like if you take for instance the BMW. BMW is right now advertising that they've integrated conversational AI capabilities into their cars. Those OEMs have a huge problem because they're facing basically a situation where they need to integrate a different conversational AI for each and every market. Why is that? Because if you want to sell a German car integrated with like voice capabilities, for instance, in China, the US, and as well as in Russia, you have a problem because you would use a different AI in China than you would use in the US, right? Because AI development is like happening on a regional differentiated speed, and you will see different AI solutions are best suited for different use cases internationally. So it's a huge challenge because BMW has to develop against the NLP APIs of different providers. Going further, if we consider, do we have any Alexander in this room? Is anyone with the name Alexander in this room by any chance? Okay, I can tell you I have a good friend whose name is Alexander, and he has a problem. Every time he's at home and his girlfriend calls him, not only he is responding, but as well Alexa is responding. You might know the situation that Alexa asks, "How can I help you?" right? And now just imagine what will happen in a couple of years' time down the road. Once we're not only surrounded by a single AI, but by multiple AIs, how will these different AIs actually communicate about the voice comment that I'm giving? And how should the AIs know who was addressed initially? So there will be a huge, not only like a linguistic usability mess, because all of these AIs will talk differently, but as well it will be a huge question, how will these different conversational AIs exchange information about the user voice input? So what is the solution, or what do we need to dream of? We call it like the Esperanto of AI. Esperanto was the idea of a unified language across different languages, and we believe something like this could be relevant in order to make AIs better interoperable And we also could need some privacy, right? Because if we consider how voice AIs work nowadays, and I'm a very good case study, because what is happening if Alexa is listening to you, it not only tries to encode what is the intended result, why are you speaking with the AI, but as well the AI is tracking the sound of your voice, how nervous are you, it tries to read how healthy are you having maybe a cold. AIs are mining the data of our voices, and this is basically a huge issue for many consumers. Now, during the past couple of months, several studies were released that consumers are getting increasingly wary how much of the information are being exposed to those voice interfaces that are basically on by default and permanently listening on to the consumers. So we need to consider how we could protect privacy. And if we consider why do we want to speak with AIs, in the end it's basically all about the intent. We don't want to necessarily for the AI to permanently track our biohabits and so on, but instead actually it's all about why are we speaking with the AI and what kind of result do we expect from this transaction. And that's why we considered that who else AI could create a unified API, a standard in order to encode voice comments in a standardized way by an API. I will now go a little bit deeper how this could work. And for that, I would like to show you how does a voice interface nowadays being typically integrated. We see here the consumer, and the consumer speaks usually with a hardware platform, and the hardware platform usually integrates an NR and an AI system or like an NLP, and dispatches then the voice command afterwards to an e-commerce solution, e-commerce vendor like food delivery, like parking spaces, car sharing, and so on. So let's consider how this ecosystem is looking nowadays. There's basically 3 different ways how you can integrate artificial intelligence into your products. Number one is the GAFA black boxes. So for instance, you could take the Alexa SDK, and I'm from Germany. In Germany, we have, like, for instance, the BMW, like car manufacturers, or as well like Miele, which is like doing home appliances, like fridges. So if the Miele or the BMW wants to integrate a voice interface into their hardware platform, they could use the Alexa SDK. And in this moment, they have the huge advantage because Alexa, 10,000 people are working at Alexa. If the Miele is using the Alexa SDK, they basically get the best user experience because they can use this 10,000 employees of Amazon to integrate the service. But the problem is that the Miele is basically only becoming like a microphone of like this American company, because Miele can actually not define how the voice interface is interacting with the user, as well Miele is losing access to the information, to the voice information. They're basically only like a microphone for Amazon. The second option are these third-party AIs, and all of you know, for instance, Nuance. There are startups like, for instance, Rasa, many research projects as well. And that is like the option that, for instance, Mercedes did. They integrated the Houndify SDK into their cars in order to enable voice features. But the problem that Mercedes faced was that they now had to, on one hand side, design the usability of the voice interface. So Mercedes had the control over the touch point, but now they were in the similar challenge as Alexa, that they need to create the user experience. So how does the device talk with you? What kind of intonation? What kind of question formats are existing? And number two, they have the problem that they basically need to integrate at Mercedes now this catalog that actually makes the Alexa SDK so interesting. Now Mercedes has to come up with an own catalog of services. And that is very interesting if you consider how does it work in a car. I mean, there's functionalities that you want to access by your voice that are embedded on the car platform, right? Dear Mercedes, please turn down the air condition. Dear Mercedes, please navigate me to ABC. That is something that Mercedes can do on their own platform because it's their own hardware. But the problem is, as soon as you want to ask your Mercedes something that's outside of the hardware platform, for instance, like Mercedes find me an Airbnb in London, or Mercedes navigate me to a free parking space, this moment Mercedes needs to create a search catalog, and that's the problem for Mercedes because Mercedes is not a search engine, they're a car manufacturer, right? So in that moment we see there's a disparity in the ecosystem, and the third option is only like a low-level integration that you can display your services in various ecosystems, but we see there's a problem. Who else we're working on solving this problem by two components. Number one is the language protocol, the so-called who else protocol, and I'm going to talk about in detail why is it called who else. And number two, we work at setting up we work at setting up industry standards. At the moment, we're working together with DIN. DIN is the German version of ISO, so the standard setting organization of the industry, to develop interoperability standards for NLP APIs. And it looks a little bit like this, that we basically now approach different NLP manufacturers. MindMeld is, for instance, Cisco, Rasa, Fraunhofer, Houndify, IBM Watson, and so on. And we work together with them in standardizing how these different NLPs store information in a standardized format by harmonized NLP specifications. These NLP specifications are then basically the foundation for us to operate the who else protocol, which is a catalog that provides the standardized language in order to store human intents, and this way they can be operated across the various NLPs. And it looks a little bit like this. The human user approaches the AI and gives like a natural language input. Hey, AI, I need a ride to the airport for me and my friend. We need to be there, blah, 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 blah. Every human speaks differently. And I mean, that's the beauty of human languages, but as well as at the same time the challenge. This voice command would be given in a different way by all of us in the room. And this is as well the challenge for AIs. So we offer AIs this catalog in order to look up what kind of categories are available to store this information, and we do this by the language API and by a marketplace API. The marketplace API enables the OEM now, we have the hardware manufacturer, enables the hardware manufacturer to sell spoken intents via a unified marketplace. And this way, on one hand side, the OEM can integrate additional services, but as well, language becomes comparable, so we can later on exchange NLPs in a faster and easier way. And the nice thing is that this way, we're not competing on like the NLP development. As mentioned, Amazon has 10,000 developers. It would be an utopia to compete with somebody like Google or Tencent on the NLP models. But instead, we only provide the NLP providers like a standardized command and system in order to exchange information, meaning that the AI providers still can provide the user experience and take care for the different speaking styles that an AI can have, and we only enable them to exchange information in a standardized format. And this way, if we look at like from the bird's eye perspective, we have the hardware manufacturer. The hardware manufacturer are currently integrating the DIN standards and using this intent catalog, and by this way different services can be integrated. The dream fulfilled of a unified language across different AIs. Is this a new idea? I mean, this sounds a little bit wild if you're not too familiar with this topic of standardization or NLP, but as a matter of fact, since 3 weeks we're being copied by Amazon. Amazon just announced that they set up an industry consortium where they brought together 30 industry partners such as Tencent, such as BMW, that are working as well on developing harmonized NLP API specifications. And what they now choose in the first version of this consortium, that they're going to agree that different trigger words lead to different AIs. So if you say, hey Alexa, it goes to Amazon. If you say, hey Magenta, it goes to Deutsche Telekom, Magenta speaker, and so on and so forth. But and now we have like a little bit the question, will they really agree, right? Because human language works differently than those AI brands in theory. Because it's unlikely, in our opinion, that for instance, BMW and Mercedes will agree who owns the voice command, I need a car-sharing AI. So in that moment, we see a huge linguistic usability mess that we need to address. And we believe this problem will not disappear. Because this moment where we have like one ecosystem that's being brought up, there will be as well other ecosystems be built up by competitors of Amazon. Now I wrote down the Walmart consortium. Walmart doesn't have yet an NLP consortium, but certainly they will. But as well, if you look around, and for instance, in the research landscape, at the moment there's approximately 25 consortia worldwide that are competing with different NLP standards. So this problem of like 5 AIs listening to the same user won't disappear even if we have consortia. So we need to think how to make different AIs interoperable. And that leads to the second part of this presentation, the topic of voice internet discoverability. The problem is that voice interfaces are basically a huge challenge of not seeing what you can ask for, right? The average user remembers 3.7 brands during 80% of the time. And now it's a problem, if we all imagine the situation, if you don't see what you can ask for, how will you know what you can ask for? And this is why we maybe need to reconsider how are these voice interfaces are designed and what kind of usability mechanisms can we apply. And the even bigger challenge, I spoke about it, 3.7 brands on average per user. If we consider voice interfaces, that we want to build voice interfaces that reach as well many different demographics, we need to consider to find a shared language across all those demographics that's equally usable for all of them. Our idea in that moment is one question instead of many brands. Coming back to my friend Alexander with his Alexa, the problem is of Alexa that you need to install a new service for every that you need to install a new app, a new name for any kind of service that you might want to ask for. And this is a huge problem because if people only remember 3.7 brands, the question will be how many apps should they install and how will they actually find this kind of apps. So our idea is one question for any kind of AI service by the standardized catalog. And this idea is not so new if we're really honest and consider how digital technologies work. I mentioned to you I'm a sociologist, and if you look deep into how technologies have been changing the way we're communicating and how language has been affected by it, you all know the like button, hey, I like that, you have to Google that, you should Photoshop that, and so on. Our idea is to create a better verb for the voice internet by the phrase of who else. I'm going to play this demo, why who else is so interesting as a trigger word.
Who else might it be?
Who else knows?
No.
Me? Who else was in this club?
Who else wants to go for the gold?
My pants?
Wait, who else has he been fucking?
Famous.
Who else, George? Come on.
You know my vote. Who else is with me? Party with Aretha! And, you know who else has a weight issue?
Who else was in there?
She want to see who else did.
But you know who else I let down? Pretty much everyone who's important to me.
But who else could it be? Hey, who else?
Replaceable. Who else would they find qualified to dance with a rodent?
Who else is in Vice up there? Who else?
Well, I suppose you can guess how it will continue. And the interesting thing is now I will gonna talk why is this question so very much suited, but we can already agree that it's a phrase that's very often used, right? So the thing is, our assumption is that who else questions are self-explanatory. And now coming back to this question, how do people remember online services? I spoke about it that in the old days, basically, we had to learn associations for brands, right? This moment when if you ask somebody, I need an apartment somewhere, and you're coming to London, you need an apartment somewhere, people say, go to Airbnb. And this sort of connections always had to be learned, and that is a huge challenge of branding basically user experiences. Now our assumption in regards to those who else questions is, because they're so easy to use and because they're spoken by so many people already, that we basically invented a self-explanatory brand where people automatically can anticipate every other question that they might could ask the voice interface. So the first moment that I learned that I can ask for like who else is looking for an apartment or who else is wants to go on a date, in that moment I can automatically anticipate every other who else question that might be out there. Why is that? Because you can assume that naming is basically the file system of the human thought, of the human mind. And what we can see here is the abstraction, the pyramid of intellectual abstraction, and what we can basically see here in how far other brands in this old branding world, you have to associate. Tinder stands for dating, so you go to Tinder, right? And what we can basically see here is in how far we can assume that who else is maybe like on a higher level of intellectual abstraction in the human mind. And the reason for that is so-called universal grammar. Noam Chomsky describes in the 60s in how far certain semantics appear to be hardwired in the human mind. Language that is self-explanatory to your own thinking. And there was, in 2014, there was an alternative Nobel Prize awarded to the proof of another universal grammar for the universal grammar Ha. It's Max Planck researchers showed in how far ha is a semantic that is available in every kind of language of the world. And we want to do the same with who else, or we think we can do the same in regards to who else. Because let's look into it. People are communicating, and we've seen it in the video clip as well, but as well you can see it if you use data mining on social networks. Here we see it for Facebook and Twitter. And how far who else is a terminology that's statistically more often used across those services. And we can see it as well if we go to Google search results. You will notice that if you do a Google search on who else across different languages, quién más, wer noch, and so on and so forth, that this terminology, that the semantic is like much more, it has like a much higher number of clicks, hits in the Google search results than any kind of other language. We see here who else and what else are terms very frequent across the web, and we compared it across to other terms, and we can see that it's like a factor of 1,000, if not even more, that who else is like much more common in human language, much more common across the web. And as well, if you look into your smartphone apps, and that is no anecdotal evidence, we can see how it's being used in a very, very standardized way across the sign-up screens of LinkedIn, of Facebook. Who else appears to be a question that, at least with UX designers, is very, very famous. Last but not least, who else is as well George Clooney. I mean, George Clooney is what else, to be honest, but what they created basically is one of the most famous brands in consumer marketing. So we can assume that who else is a semantic that everybody knows and uses already. And now let's go back to this question about different demographics, right? We want to create 8 voice interfaces, and that's the beauty of voice interfaces, because language is a tool that's available to all of us, and even at the youngest ages. Now we need to find a language that's suited to do so. And if we consider that such kind of simplified language is easier to learn for many different demographics, maybe you can see why there might be a reason to give actually a simpler and easier language to the internet. And as well, if we consider how should we speak with AIs in the future? Because the big question is, why should you be nicer to an AI that you actually have to, right? If you know that Siri doesn't care how nice you ask. I mean, of course, you could ask, hey, Siri, if you don't mind, could you maybe order a taxi, but only if you find some blah, 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 blah. You know that the AI doesn't care how nice you ask it, and so the goal has to become to be as explicit as necessary in order to convey the intent to your AI, but at the same time, you want to give in a sufficient range of context, because if you say only like taxi, I mean, how should the AI know that it's being addressed, right? So we have to find a language that's explicit enough to address an AI in a semantic, identifiable way, and we believe that this sort of who else questions are the shortest yet explicit, correct way in order to convey the intent. And if we go further, the aspect could be that we don't want to change how people speak with AIs. I mean, quite honestly, I don't care what you say to an AI, but we believe that people, once they've learned these questions, will default to more often use this question, because it's much simpler, it's much nicer, and much easier. So what we see here is how the user orders for the first time, like with an arbitrary language. Hey, fridge, I want to order pizza, my fridge is empty, blah, blah, blah. And the next time we assume that they automatically would ask who else questions, because it's self-explanatory, it's a question that works for any kind of service, and people don't have to know the actual brands that they want to call for, right? People don't care about brands, if you're very honest. And we think, therefore, that in this time of voice internet, we see a huge paradigm shift in terms of usability. And as well, in terms of economics, it's very interesting, because if you consider that you can explain with like one question many different services, this could be basically the end of niches. We see here traditional advertisement, and traditional advertisement takes place in like one vertical. Hey, you're hungry, go to Delivery Hero to order pizza, blah, blah, blah. Hey, you want to go out to a concert, go to this and this service, blah, 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 blah. We think that will become this will become unnecessary, because if one brand is suffice to explain any kind of service at the same time, we can basically bury all those old legacy brands. And people remember, again, the 3.7 brands on average. How many brands do we really need? And maybe we could save a lot of advertising cost. So to sum it up, this short presentation, maybe an outlook how we could move towards voice internet. First off, what is this idea inspired by? It's basically bookkeeping and accounting systems. The huge advantage of bookkeeping and accounting systems, if you look into economic history, was that what you see is here is the German accounting system, the dative account chart. Just as a background, how does it work? Account charts basically define what kind of account numbers are available and what kind of names are possible in order to store the information about the transaction in a financial statement. And the huge advantage of these accounting systems was basically that you can always change the accountant, right? And similar, we believe that the huge advantage is if we start using an accounting system for human language and AI, that we can basically start making AIs better interchangeable and as well exchange them across different markets. In the case of BMW could combine better combine different NLP systems and so on and so forth. So this idea is not new to structure things in a better way, but it's, at the moment becomes very needed for AI in our opinion. Number two is we want to make languages we make natural language processing cross-language interoperable. Why is that? We want to actually bridge this localization problem by providing the standard not only in one language but across different languages, and this way as well make transactions better interoperable across different languages so that one voice command can be processed by all AIs in a standardized way. And in the long-term vision, therefore, is where create like explainable explainable supply chains, because this protocol can be, of course, take only place in the back end. But what is if we manage ways to actually onboard more people on such kind of system? And here we see it again. The user wants to give an order. Hey, Bosch fridge, I want to order pizza, pepperoni, and I need milk for my coffee tomorrow. Can you deliver in 30 minutes? Blah blah blah. The user gives a comment, and our suggestion is not only to store the information once in a standardized way, but as well provide for any kind of stakeholder in the supply chain the opportunity to use such kind of language, and this way chime in if they want to provide services. And last but not least, and that is a little bit due to my background in philosophy, we think it can be as well used for the annotation of visual information, right? In this moment where you have an AI and this AI is interpreting what is on this picture, and the AI recognizes, okay, there's a BMW, there's a Volkswagen, there's a Renault, there's a Honda. Such kind of interpretation, what is on a picture, is basically nothing else than a philosophical question of who else is with me agreeing that this is an Audi, right? Who else is agreeing there are people on the street? So in that sense, we believe that there's an idea, a blueprint maybe, to as well explore other ways of using such kind of standardized grammar in order to make AIs interoperable. Next steps, to sum it up, right now we're setting up this DIN and ISO and IEEE standard consortiums. The standard consortium work in the following way: that you bring together on one hand side industry partners. So in our case, it's for instance people like BMW or PwC that have use cases in order to use NLPs. Number two, you bring you invite NLP developers, such as for instance Rasa, such as for instance IBM Watson, that you provide them the opportunity for both sides together to define this NLP API interoperability standards. So they agree basically on harmonized API specifications. And number two, we work at open source pilots where we right now try to figure out what is the best possible way in order to build a shared namespace where multiple AIs as well as multiple OEMs can join on a single platform in order to exchange information using this protocol. This is how we want to make AIs talk to each other. Now we have 6 minutes time. I'm curious, what is your feedback? What are your ideas? Do you have any questions? Please.
Yeah, one thing. Oh, sorry. Thanks, Tobias, for the talk. I thought it was really kind of thought-provoking. I was wondering, because you started by talking about Esperanto, but Esperanto didn't really happen. You know, as you can tell today, we have English and Google Translate. And actually what you're doing also reminds me a bit of the whole idea of the semantic web that started about 20 years ago, and the idea that we could make the web this really tidy universe where everything was classified and ontologies and that sort of things. But clearly that didn't really happen either, because people are lazy, people lie, that sort of things. So what makes you think that this is different and that you'll actually be able to achieve this for this particular use case? Is it because you're going to go for restrict the number of use cases, simple commands, that sort of thing, so that your problem space is smaller? Is that the idea?
Yeah, sort of. Thanks so much for the reference to Esperanto, and that is why the reason why it's only very small on the slides, because once as a background to Esperanto, the idea of Esperanto was that it's a simplified language that basically takes the most common semantics from Spanish, from Italian, from English. And the idea is that this way, because it takes only these components from these different languages, that it becomes easier to learn from learners from all kinds of nationalities. And it was like theoretically a nice idea, but in reality it was yet another language to learn, and it actually confused people on their own language habits. And that's the reason why I don't really compare it to Esperanto. It never worked because it was too complicated. Nevertheless, the idea was very good. And therefore, the idea was very good. The second part of your question is, you mentioned it absolutely right. We believe that language is actually not so very complicated. I mean, of course, we all are speaking differently. And during the past 24 hours, I've met so many different nationalities here. It's really like, it's a beauty of personal interaction. But in the end of the day, and that's the reason why we're all coming as well to the same conference, it's all about like a shared topic, right? And if we separate this lingual complexity and the simplicity of this world, then we'll notice that actually the contents of human speech can be broken down to a mere. It's now 150 categories of intents approximately, and you can see it. You can see it as something like who else looks for a bicycle, who else looks for a taxi. Who else wants to go to a concert? Who else is a doctor? Who else needs a delivery service? I mean, the variety of internet services and the variety of intents that you could store is actually very limited. And therefore, our suggestion is to initially start with such kind of simplified catalog where we provide 150 categories in order to make AIs comparable. And we provide it on top to existing NLPs, basically, because that's the reality. There's already like many different AIs out there, and there's already many different standard specifications, and we don't want to compete on the technological standard specification. Instead, we make an offer for a simplified way to store only like the content of the voice command. So, long story short, yes, we focus by limiting the problem space to the question: why did the user talk to the AI? What kind of result did he expect? And what kind of meta information do we need in order to display and dispatch the comment?